Hey everyone! Good start. Welcome to the end of November and the wrap up for our Hello Hemlock discussion on Annabel Lyon, The Golden Mean. So I'd highly recommend that you watch Susheila's video first and then come back to me. One of the things that Susheila mentioned at the end of her video was that because this is a CanLit book club and a CanLit channel, she wanted to try and figure out a way that she could kind of relate this particular novel to Canadian literature or Canadian sense of national identity or cultural identity. One of the comments that was left in Susheila's video was by someone who is both Canadian and a writer, and she was saying that when she writes, she doesn't ever intentionally try and infuse any sort of national identity in her writing. So because it's a particularly challenging book to kind of fit into a Canadian canon, I thought that I would give it a try and see if there were any ways that I could kind of turn this book into Canadian literature. I was kind of thinking like, other than the fact that Annabel Lyon is Canadian, what makes this a Canadian story? I don't know for sure if Lyon did try to kind of infuse any sense of cultural identity into her work. I do kind of wonder if her cultural background and the world that she lives in reality has made some sort of impact on her writing. So Lyon very carefully studied Aristotle, and something that he was actually known for saying, apparently, "The greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. This alone cannot be imparted by another. It is the mark of genius, for to make good metaphors implies an eye for resemblance." So two kind of themes I thought I would cover is isolation as well as knowledge. So isolation and loneliness are pretty common and popular themes within Canadian literature. I think it comes down to the Canadian landscape as being a very harsh and relatively uninhabitable place to live. Each province has its own weather-related challenges. There's no real California of Canada, and although someplace like a city like Toronto or Winnipeg or Calgary or Edmonton or Vancouver, Victoria, Fredericton, etc., these are fairly large cities in relation to how big our population is. The fact that Canada as a geographical area is so huge and so vast means that for the most part there are very few people that live here. The further away you get from a major city center, the less people there are and the further they are physically from one another. Alexander the Great, who as a boy is being kind of tutored by Aristotle, he says to Aristotle about knowledge, "You and I can appreciate the glory of things. We walk to the very edge as everyone else knows and understands and experiences it, and then we walk the next step. We go places no one has ever been. That's who we are. That's who you've taught me to be." So although they are speaking about the mind and those kind of emotional virtuous balances that you need to, or Alexander needs to find, which is what the title of the book is based on, that idea of a golden mean, the balance between two extremes. There is this sense of pioneering and exploration that is really rich within their dialogue. Not only that, but that idea of exploration and charting uncharted territory is something that exists within the history of the Canadian nation. So very similar to a lot of other Canadian authors, Aristotle as a character is quite isolated. And if you look at an author like Alice Munro, she often writes about isolated figures within rural kind of backdrops. So no matter how much Aristotle moves around or explores or goes with an entourage of people to various different locations, he kind of fails to get that sense of belonging and find his own balance within a setting or within a group or within a community. Another topic that I wanted to cover was knowledge and how this book kind of treats knowledge as if it's synonymous with conquering. So the character of Alexander the Great, as he is portrayed in this book, is very similar to the French and English settlers that colonized Canada. So on their journeys, both the English and the French settlers slaughter and betray many different types of people that are indigenous to the land that they have come to colonize. There's this kind of violent act to understand. So Aristotle tells Alexander about the Persians. You'll have to destroy their world just to get into it. Knowledge or understanding for both Aristotle and Alexander is this sense of conquering and colonization and kind of mastering, whether it's a person or an object or an animal specimen. Like Aristotle is kind of jotting down notes about his wife's genitals as they're having sex, and he's like disemboweling live chameleons, and then Alexander is going off and beheading people. The reason that this violence exists is always motivated by this sense of searching for knowledge or searching for the truth, and it's a little unsettling because there is this sense of control as opposed to observation. Much like the French and English settlers that colonized Canada, Aristotle and Alexander learn by destruction. So, is this metaphor intentional? I have no idea. So often with Canadian literature, we really, as a critical culture, we really kind of pull at straws, and with the luminaries, Eleanor Catton was born in Canada, but she has spent very little time living here. But because she wrote this amazing book and spent the majority of her life in New Zealand and was born in London, Ontario, we're really happy to call her Canadian. Whereas, for this book and for Annabel Lyon, is this in any way a Canadian book? I hope you all had a great month, and I will talk to you later. Bye. So I'd highly recommend that you watch this.